Okay, hi folks. Welcome to this very special KUBECON live stream, Security Insights from Cloud Native Insiders, with these two fantastic dog logos. We should have come prepared with lots of dog puns, but unfortunately that's not to be, although I do have my my dog mug, so that's at least a start. I'm Matt Jarvis. I'm a Senior Developer Advocate at Snyk. And I'm joined today by my co-host, Andrew Krug, Security Evangelist at Datadog.
Hey there.
We'd obviously all, we'd love to be at KUBECON in person, but given the virtual nature of the event, we have a lovely panel of guests here joining us from all over the world. So I'll hand over to Andrew to handle the intros.
Yeah, we'll just go right to left on my screen. Let's just start with Kathy.
Hi there. My name is Kathy Giori. I'm currently, I would say I'm more of a newbie to all the cloud native security stuff than rest of you. I'm more of an edge person, but combining with the cloud. So I work at Zededa.com, Zededa.com. And what they've done is created a security model that works for pushing applications and deploying containers and VMs at the edge with a security model that to me acts like a private VPN tunnel. So that's where I work now, and that's the type of stuff I'm doing, a developer program for that company.
And then Brad, you're up next.
Hey, Brad Geesaman, co-founder of Darkbit, a small security consulting company that does cloud and Kubernetes specific security posture assessments. So thanks for having me.
Next up is Brandon.
Hi everyone, I'm Brandon Lim. I am a technical lead at CNCF SIG Security. So we do all stuff contributing to security assessments, white papers, and things like that. I'm also a senior engineer at IBM Research, working on container security research, all the way from image security to runtime attestations and hardware attestations.
And last but certainly not least, our friend the pirate here, Magno.
Hey everyone, thank you for the invite. I'm happy to be here. My name is Magno Logan. I work at Trend Micro as an information security specialist and also a senior threat researcher, where I focus most of my research on Kubernetes security. And I'm also part of the CNCF SIG Security, or should I say tag security now.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to all of our guests for being here today, taking time out. I know we have pretty much all the time zones represented here. So pick a time that's not convenient for anyone, right? But is great for KubeCon EU. So we'll just, thanks again. We'll just jump into the agenda here. So this is what we're going to do today over the next hour that we all have together. We've got some ways for you to get swag from both Datadog and Snyk or Snyk, whichever you prefer. We'll throw those links up on screen, and then we're just going to get right into some great discussion, like what happened over the last couple days, what do we think might happen over KubeCon, and we're going to talk about the recently released Snyk Cloud Native Application Security Report. So let's start with the swag, though. So you can register for either Datadog or Snyk swag on the links that or both. There's no restrictions. There's separate landing pages for a reason. So go and reg for one or more, and we're gonna send you something just for being here today. And we'll keep putting these links up on and off through the session. But right now, I think I'm gonna hand it back over to I'm not going to hand it back over to Matt. We're going to talk about Cloud Native Security Day. So one of the things that KubeCon's been doing for a bit now is these ecosystem adjacent events on day kind of zero of the conference. And so this year was my first time attending Cloud Native Security Day, but just kind of curious what you all might have thought of some of the talks, if you had time to go to some of the Cloud Native Security Day talks, and what the trends were. that you're kind of seeing this year?
So who's going first?
I can
Go
start.
for it, Magno. Go for it. Was
Okay.
anyone wearing pirate hats? That's the question
Yeah.
that everyone wants to know.
For sure. Yeah. So yeah, we had the Cloud Native Security Day yesterday, right? It was lots of fun. It was the whole day with a lot of presentations about Cloud Native security, very deep and technical research and presentations as well. Really good stuff. I recommend everyone to take a look if you haven't had the chance yet. But we also had our second CTF from our Cloud Native Security Day. So we had 6 challenges where the participants were able to explore some scenarios from inside the clusters or trying to compromise the cluster to find their flags. And we also had 2 live stream sessions on Twitch about the CTF, also with some guest speakers like Brad that's here with us today. So it was really awesome just to understand their journey and how they got involved with Cloud Native Security. And also we put them on the spot there, solving some of the CTF challenges live, and it was really great.
So for folks who are watching who may not be aware of SIG Security, I know we've got a lot of new folks joining KUBECON this year. Perhaps it'd be good to talk a little bit about what SIG Security does. Maybe Brandon, you could kind of give us a little overview of where SIG Security, what SIG Security is, and what the outputs of it.
Most definitely. So SIG Security is part of CNCF. We are one of the special interest groups, although we will now, as Magno kind of talked a little bit about earlier, we are now being renamed to, I think, as trusted technical advisory groups, so tags. And the idea is we act as both an advisory role to the CNCF TOC in terms of security issues and projects, as well as we kind of have projects that we try and expand security education and use throughout the ecosystem. So a couple of things that we've worked on before is the Cloud Native Security Whitepaper that came out sometime last year. It's a lot of resources there. We do security assessment for CNCF projects. So for projects that are coming, for example, through incubation, through graduation, we do assessment to really evaluate the security posture of the projects. And we have, I think one of the last projects I kind of want to highlight is the supply chain catalog. This is a document that the community has put together to say, look, here are what supply chain attacks are, and here are all the past cases that have happened. It's a document that engineers or operators can bring to executives and say, this is why supply chain security is a problem. And that's kind of like the tip of the iceberg. We do a ton of stuff, and we have really, really interesting and engaging weekly meetings. And I think Matt can agree to that. But yeah, we there's a lot of things to do in the community, and check it out if you have the chance.
Yeah, it's a super friendly group. I would encourage anybody with an interest in Cloud Native Security to not only read the white paper, which I thought was fairly definitive, really, on most of the topics that are out there these days in Cloud Native Security, right? But getting involved in the community as well is really easy and friendly. So I guess the supply chain thing has probably been one of the topics that I certainly picked up on throughout some of the talks from yesterday. It's something we've heard a lot about this year. Particularly kind of around things like typo squatting and stuff like that. How big a problem do we think these things are in open source software? I know we've obviously with things like SolarWinds and stuff are on a very much a different scale, but there's been a lot of talk recently around supply chain in open source, which is particularly relevant for our communities. We have the recent issue with malicious patches being fed into the kernel, and obviously some of these typo squatting things that have happened in some of the bigger package repositories. So yeah, how big do we think that problem really is? Brad, you got any thoughts on that?
Yes, bigger and bigger every day. Every time code is committed, it's a potential introduction point. And I think, from a cloud native and container focused company, like if that's how you're operating your business, the touch points for external attack surface are fairly well understood. However, that sort of squeezes the problem over into, well, where's your code coming from? And everything that goes into it, and everything that goes into building it, and then everything that goes into the OPSEC of the people that are building it. And that's the $1 trillion question, possibly even more. And I think it's important that we continue to call this out, that we continue to find and develop and innovate best practices around certain areas to squeeze that down as much as we can, because ultimately it's driving trust from untrusted code. You're trying to find some level of policy or some level of acceptable risk, and you're trying to make that determination without inhibiting your development velocity that you chose or are tending to use open source software to gain the advantage of. You're standing on the shoulders of giants. So I don't see it going away anytime soon. However, that increased focus is going to find innovation, tooling, best practices, processes, and paving the way so that it gets easier and easier to get to an acceptable risk over time.
I'd like to just put in a plug for the requirement that sort of big, bulky pieces that the community and industry lies on should be open as much as possible, because when it is open, you can patch it faster, like anyone can apply the patches and identify the issues. And that's one of the reasons the Zededa Cloud Orchestration project, which is really taking all this cloud native stuff and saying the zero trust model is also, we're including these PCs on the manufacturing line or whatever. And the Edge software is a Linux Foundation project called EVE, EVE for Edge Virtualization Engine. And the same models apply so that you don't trust what's right. You have this thin shim that's just a virtualization shim, and that EVE OS is completely open source with certificate models to the cloud. So you treat it as part of your orchestrated security model solution. And so I think it's very important to me, above all, to have these core pieces be open source. It's easier to hide them in the cloud. It's harder to hide them when they're pushed down to the edge. And as much as that it can be open as possible, with still allowing businesses to have a business model around them.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Whether the threat model is greater if you've got Linux running a car or running a rocket than whether it's running Kubernetes or not, I guess. I mean, I've definitely seen many years ago the things like continuous signing of build chains in the embedded space being much more prevalent than we've seen it in the cloud space historically.
Yeah. Well, rather than having individual applications have their own security models, but now we have this edge security model where that part is certificate, and then you can deploy your K3S clusters on your edge nodes. And with Rancher application, we announced that last week. So you can start doing some of these models you're familiar with, even when your hardware is not in some mysterious data center. It's often the, places where it could be in oil wells, it could be manufacturing lines, it could be in cars. Yeah.
Cryptography, though, is just really like one piece of the puzzle there, right? So I think a lot of these projects, which are totally great, like Tough and Toto, are solving like the signature problem. They're starting to make signatures and reproducible builds and knowing when something's changed really, really accessible to development teams. But then observability, knowing when those things are going into a release that's actually going to a customer system, I think is the other big part of that, which is the far harder part, the social part, because you can trick a build system into signing something all day long, right? And it doesn't matter how many signatures or distributed trust models we stack on top of it, because there's still human factor in literally everything, or just not looking. Like how many breaches this year or big security incidents when they did the retro were folks saying, oh yeah, we did everything right. We had every kind of alarm. We have a great IR team, but no one was looking over here at this stack of alerts because it was in a silo somewhere, or they were using too many systems.
Yeah, I was going to say that the stack of alerts that they probably don't have a lot of muscle memory for, right? It's just not, it might be happening every day, but it doesn't mean that everybody's building the muscles to respond to that every day like it's standard patch Tuesday. Everybody has a very repeatable, I should say everybody, most people have a very repeatable process around that. And I think this is like showing where muscles need to be developed.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of the technology in place. Andrew, like you mentioned, in total, all the signing services. I think there is a bit more that we can do in terms of, there are a lot of capabilities within these technologies that provide kind of ability to split the management across different parties. And I think that is something that, as a community, we have to kind of come together and say, okay, this is how we should work together. This is how we should start performing governance and kind of creating a more streamlined and maybe even open source system. And I think there is, the work that's being done with the Secure Software Factory is one good example of that, right? They are saying, here's a template of how you do it. Here's a basis on how we can build on top of it. And that's just, copy and paste this so that everyone gets the knowledge, everyone gets the skills, everyone gets the way how to manage these things together.
So one of the other things that I've certainly found interesting, that there was some talk about yesterday, and I think there's some talks about later in the week, was this whole confidential computing thing, where we basically can say, we don't have to trust the host anymore. What were folks' thoughts on that kind of sphere? I have to admit, I don't understand it very deeply, but.
So this is a place where I dabble quite a bit. And I think that the idea is kind of the philosophy is not to trust anything at all, right? But essentially, really, I think what it boils down is to having the minimal amount of trust, right? And even when you talk about confidential computing and then taking things in software and then putting them in hardware, right? For example, with Intel SGX, what were you doing? You were trusting Intel, right? So you're not necessarily, there is some kind of trust that needs to be established. I think that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is that, there is a confidential computing ties hand in hand with attestations and being able to have immutability, because there is still an amount of code that is needed to run the confidential enclaves that need to be trusted. And I think the idea is that, that amount of code today is still fairly large. This has to kind of be reduced a little bit. And, hopefully in the ideal world, be able to be, proven theoretically.
But I think that if that can succeed, and you can have these, like, they're even using blockchain auditing and stuff like that. If you can succeed at doing root of trust attestation of applications and software, it's better than the current approach, at least on the edge, where all they do is apply IT services firewalls. I mean, they're just treating security as a packet level destination source kind of problem and ports. And that model is really hard to fight. I mean, it's really hard to just maintain and understand if it's actually working. I still think there should be more and more pushes to get that sort of trusted fabric and trusted software checks or whatever going. It's better than just allowing networking to try to solve your problems.
It's a very good quote. We should save that one. And networking's usually the root of all the problems, isn't it? But
Yeah, we kind of saw this years ago as kind of the very first overlays started to become popularized, right? When Kubernetes first kind of came into being, all the namespaces and like networks between sets of pods were relatively flat, and then we saw adoption of various overlays. But that's just one set of controls. If you saw the lightning talk I did, it was a little bit of a rant on how much harder some of these security features are actually making doing incident response and forensics. So like, as we talk about zero trust computing, we talk about secure enclaves. It's almost like the audit logs and what I was calling lawful intercepts to go in and reverse engineer what happened after the fact in an incident are kind of an afterthought. Like we're so focused on pushing to the other side of security that we're almost not assuming breach at some point and making it easy to go back in and kind of reconstruct these things. So curious on other folks' thoughts there.
Okay, so yeah, I think assuming breach is a good approach to take, right? Especially using something like the MITRE ATT&CK framework, right? So I think that's it's really important for you to trace. It's not about if it's gonna happen to you; it's about when, right? So assuming that already creates the mindset of, okay, I'm breached, so what I'm going to do, right? So what are the next steps? What are my main gaps, right? So I think doing some red team or purple team exercises are really important to identify those gaps and make sure that you patch or you have some proper alerts for those.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think there's this prevention versus detection, yin yang, ebb and flow. And I think as supply chain discussions come, it's always like, how do we prevent this? How do we prevent this? And the defense in depth stance is like Magno was saying, is assume breach here, where, look, we can do all of this and we can get to a point of diminishing returns at every level of the supply chain that we can get to. Like, you're just a normal human just trying to do your business, right? You're trying to move your cards from left to right and get your features pushed. Like, how do I do this in the safest way possible? You're thinking about trying to reduce risk to the point where it's more costly than it is to address it. You're trying to do that, but at the same time, and I think what Andrew, your lightning talk highlights is, you can go too far and forget about all the downstream activities that you would have to do if there was a breach. And a little bit of empathy goes a long way there of like, well, if I want to recreate this entire thing, I have to understand 12 different technologies, 12 different layers. And so by pushing this far without thinking of the assumed breach or all those activities after, you might be creating a lot of excess toil and a lot of confusion, and then requiring expertise that maybe you do or don't have, or you'd have to outsource instead if it was sort of a balance. So I see that shift, and we can bring that back a little bit and make everybody's lives a little bit easier.
I think on top of that as well, I think having zero trust and having these technologies be used kind of helps actually scope down the threat models to even finer grain things, so that I think monitoring and detection become a little bit easier as well.
Yeah, logs, metrics, and monitoring certainly have become enormously popular in Kubernetes and like the DevOps space, right? But I kind of look beyond that as forensics being the activity we do when all of those things have totally failed. So when every single defense in depth control you have fails and all your logs, metrics, monitoring are not adequate to reconstruct the complex path of an attacker through a Kubernetes cluster, and you have nodes running potentially hundreds of pods for, hundreds of customers, what do you do then? And how accessible is that? And what's the relative level of difficulty there?
So commercial plug, Andrew. Well, how does Datadog help that?
Well, I don't think anybody helps with the forensics problem. Okay. I mean, we help with the logs, metrics, and monitoring problem. But if you're talking about 0 day in the Kubernetes API itself, like some of the unique ones that we've seen for authentication bypass. I'll just take a contrived example from years back. When somebody actually manages to pivot onto a series of nodes and evade the logging systems because they're highly privileged, what do you do then?
Oh, okay. So you're saying that you can avoid some of the standard metrics, and that's still how you can weasel your way in.
Yeah, attacker does basic tracks covering, and we're forced back to this, like many years old thing, traditional system forensics. But it's so complex now because the tooling. There's gaps in the tooling. There's been advancements in memory security. There's been, a lot of these logs aren't really designed to be super parsable. It's really challenging.
It almost seems like you need kind of data fusion. You need network level, app level, host level. There's a lot of different levels to try to synthesize.
That's always been the problem in distributed systems, though, right? Is correlation across huge numbers of events at many different levels, and I don't feel like we're any closer to solving that problem. The kind of root cause analysis has the same problem, right, in distributed systems. And I remember when I was an IBM, Brandon, we were always talking about how we're going to do this fantastic RCA with new products, and I never saw anybody actually achieve that.
Yeah,
well, also you don't want to. Yeah, it's too much data to store. You want to have sort of immediate analysis, like apply machine learning, AI to the source right away. Yeah, that's hard.
I do like one of kind of the threads that that I see projects go into is the idea of replayability. I think that's really awesome. I saw some stuff with especially with all this new eBPF technology that's being put in, being able to replay exactly what the syscall, what the packets that went through were. Obviously on the single node itself, but then when you go back to the network level, I think that still becomes really messy, especially with like network partitions and things like that.
I mean, I think there was, but I think EBF has got this kind of fantastic opportunity there, because the kernel knows about almost everything that's going on, right? But then you kind of cycle back around to the problem where we started this conversation on that, we didn't look at those logs over there because people had forgotten they existed, and it's just another, eBPF has the possibility for creating such gigantic amounts of data. We're already drowning under the amount of data that distributed systems create, and that we kind of need from time to time to be able to do these kinds of activities. But yeah, so I think it has huge promise, and also, it's one of those things that might fill you full of dread.
That
else, that
that and WebAssembly as well.
Well, and you can only instrument so many things with eBPF, right? So you can only add so many probes before it starts to become similar to the problems we used to have with Audit D, where we have buffer sizes, and we can maintain integrity and ordering, but there's still probably going to be some loss of fidelity at some point if we just instrument everything.
But if you don't instrument, you don't know what's going on.
Right. So yeah, the pattern of good defaults there, I think, continues to be a trend in the right direction. But
where do you think the gaps are? Are there still sort of big gaps, big challenges in the instrumentation side?
I'm curious to see what other folks' thoughts are. I think we have better instrumentation than we've ever had right now. All these open projects, in CNCF are at a very high level of maturity right now. So we have the ability to know more than we ever could have.
Yeah, I think with the open tracing stuff, as well as your integration with service mesh, I think service mesh definitely helps tracing a lot. And there used to be applications who have both the business logic as well as part of the infrastructure that it handles, and so you couldn't get certain information out of it that was hidden inside the application. But service mesh and the way containers are orchestrated has really opened that up. So I feel like we do have the information, and it's there are now so many structures that are useful to really evaluate the information. So I think it is definitely very hopeful.
Yeah, I've spoken to a lot of organizations in my past few months here, and overwhelmingly, the problem is not necessarily getting the telemetry or the observability or the data or the stream. It is overwhelmingly adding the right context and bubbling up the right things and the right priority.
Analysis.
And yeah, absolutely, exactly. And so, the challenges is like, well, we have all this data, we have all these streams, we're getting this, we're seeing this, and we can do all these amazing things, but they're competing for the time of the operators, or the time of the platform teams, the time of the security folks. Like, there's a degree of trust that your tooling you have with the team, and just a few false positives will burn that trust, and you'll go into trust debt, and then you won't trust it, and then you won't put the effort in to keep tuning it. And so I think, just finding the signal out of the noise and then combining the multiple signals to have something that is high enough that it warrants the occasional false positive and the team doesn't lose trust in it. Like I've just seen, like you say, the alerts, customers I've talked to in the past year, like, yep, we get these audit alerts and they go to the Slack channel, but nobody really reads it. And you're like, well, why? Well, because it's 300 a day. And like, do you have the ability to tune it? Not really. Okay. So there's that balance, and there's that loss of trust in the tooling. And they're like, well, if I can't tune it and it's too verbose and nobody's really, and this is the other thing, the incentive to be good at this is not necessarily how you're incentivized as a security team. You're reducing risk, you're patching things, you're typically behind on patching and misconfiguration and all the other things that you have to do. Like, watching alerts tends not to get graded as highly in the priority line. So the challenge, I think this is where projects and admittedly vendors have a lot of opportunity here to help with that pain and help distill these things down in the way they see it, so that some patterns and some best practices can emerge.
Well, it's curious you say that, because it's one of the things out of the Snyk report that jumped out at me was the sense that developers thought they were, in charge of or responsible for a lot of security, and then then there are security quote teams who feel the burden's all on them, and how do you get that collaboration going where they can leverage each other and not reinvent the wheel?
Agreed.
So that is a fantastic opportunity to segue there into our, thank you, Kathy, brilliant segue into our second topic of today, which is the Cloud Native Application Security report that Snyk have just released. And I can put the URL just up for folks who might want to take a look at this for themselves. There was we surveyed around 600 organizations, I think, to produce that report. Did the findings kind of fit with what your expectations were? I don't know who wants to chime in there.
Sure, I can chime in. So yeah, definitely. I think one of the things that caught my attention there is the part of the incidents, right? So we're moving to the cloud, and especially now with the pandemic, a lot of shifts. A lot of companies have been forced to shift to the cloud, even though they didn't have any experience or they didn't have any source of resources and qualified people to help them with that, right? And so we've seen a huge increase on misconfiguration issues, right? So people are moving to the cloud and they think that it's just as simple and don't understand the responsibility matrix and think that the cloud provider is responsible for all the security features, right? And so I totally agree with that, that misconfiguration issues are increasing and will be increasing for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I'll tack on to that if you don't mind. I know that I fully agree. And one of the things that the cloud and cloud native applications expose is extreme levels of configurability. So seems to reason that if you have more things to configure in a more standard way, that there would be more opportunities for misconfiguration. And I think it's important to separate the misconfigurations of like, oops, accidental S3 bucket from the interchange of the behavior between multiple sets of configuration that in a unit test analogy, they seem pretty okay, but put them together, that relationship causes something to emerge that you didn't see or foresee. So, you know, I think if that falls along team boundaries, that can often happen. And so I think just as a natural effect of more configuration of everything, you have more misconfiguration. But I say this though, that has real quick, sorry, I'll let you jump in. Real quick though, that means remediation though can be expedited. If it is a configuration issue, it tends to be quicker and easier to remediate. That's the issue, that's the interplay, that's the IAM policy, we can fix it. Sorry, go ahead, Laura.
Well, I'm not the expert, but again, I find there's a conflict for me between complexity and getting it to work. And if you make the configuration, sort of optimize it for the natural operating conditions of a certain application that I'm deploying, if you apply, if there's some normalcy. But I find that, if it's not working and I just have to open up, or like, you don't want to open the floodgates of security and open all the ports and all the stuff to get it working. So if it's too complex to change or figure out, you don't want people to sort of dial down the security just to get something working. That's the trade-off and the conflict that I see in terms of making things easy enough to use and still having best practices on the security side.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting point, isn't it? I mean, there is still a massive long tail of people who just go, well, I don't really, let's just get this thing running, right? And, now you've got a container running as root, like it's got all the capabilities, that's how these things happen. And until we can solve that, I mean, you can scan that stuff with Snyk and with, and it's going to tell you that, yeah, you shouldn't be, you might want to think about, dropping all the capabilities and putting in the a minimum required set. But to a lot of people, that's just like they just don't know where to start with that. It's like, well, I think we've got another level of kind of simplification there to somehow work out what applications actually need. Like that sort of minimum set of things, because we're in our field, we say, oh yeah, you should be doing syscall filtering, you should be doing minimum capabilities, all the rest of it. But I'm an application developer, none of that stuff means anything to me. I'm just like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I just like to download a container image from Docker Hub and run my app.
Yeah, just like in the privacy world, you want to minimize the data you collect, personal information, so that you don't have that risk of accidentally exposing it or getting hacked. On the security side, you want to maximize your, think of things as untrusted, and then, minimize the amount of privilege, I should say, is maybe the way to look at it. Minimize the amount of privilege. Don't just start off with, I need the world, and then later, like assume you don't need anything, and then only open the security holes or ports that you need. And as application level developers, I agree. We tend to not think about the security first. So.
Yeah, I think this is something that definitely more tooling or more maturity in tooling and education will help. And I see, like in the report, we also see the same with. I feel like this also applies to auditing, and we see like a few more failed audits and more cloud native environment. And I think part of this is also like the audit tooling and the audit mindset. I think there is still also a gap in terms of how do we really audit cloud native infrastructures? How do we translate traditional security requirements into actual controls? And there's a lot of work being done with like mapping these things, and it's naturally more difficult, right? Because everything's decentralized. Your threat models are kind of like combined in some weird way. So I think definitely like the tooling, having more of that, and this will improve in the future.
I mean, I personally, I found the ownership thing quite interesting, and I think when we were writing the report, we didn't want to kind of make too many assumptions from that, but I thought it was a really interesting mismatch between, you know, who developers thought owned it, and by developers we would include DevSecOps, DevOps, you know, anybody who's a development team, right? And so you had on the one hand who they thought owned it, and then on the other hand who the kind of more traditional InfoSec folks thought who owned it, and it, you know, it was quite dramatic, the difference there. And I don't really know what that means, other than that, you know, it feels like there's something shifting there, or perhaps people just aren't sure who owns it, and you know.
I think.
Go ahead.
You trust yourself and you don't trust others. it's human nature.
I was just going to piggyback on what Matt said. I think that we are seeing a fundamental shift in the software development industry, this perception that developers don't really want to do the right thing, which we've been kind of, I don't know, I think it's a bad rap that developers get. I think if you put the tools in front of them to do the right thing every time, they're going to do the right thing because they're incentivized to do that. They want a good customer experience. They want the company to be successful at a fundamental level. So if you give them the tools and you make security accessible to them, which is the direction a lot of this is trending in, right? So we talk about audit mindset and we talk about threat modeling and risk assessment. These are all just ways of kind of including embedded security in your development team. And then the InfoSec folks kind of become facilitators of these processes and not kind of gatekeepers. And I think that's a trend that we're seeing go in the right direction, but there's still kind of a little bit of push and pull, which is why you get some of this data on who owns what being kind of confusing because it is a little fuzzy right now.
Yeah, exactly. And that reminds me of a presentation I saw almost, I think, 10 years ago, in 2011 at the OWASP conference, OWASP AppSec Latin America, where Dennis Cruz mentioned like how to make security invisible for the developers, right? Transparent for them. Developers, they don't like bugs, right? They don't like to be told that they're wrong, right? They want to do the right thing, right? But they need the tools the proper tools and proper training to do that, right? So I think there's been a huge shift on the mindset here, but that before developers used only to write the code and make it work, and then they start writing tests for that code as well and be responsible for those tests, right? And now they're doing the security part and automating that security and be responsible for the security as well. So as we're shifting the security left, the developers are expanding their responsibilities to the right? So they're responsible for the whole process, because if something breaks in production, is their phone that's going to ring in the weekend or in the evening, right? For them to help or to try to solve this issue. So I think that's really important.
And that's, I can just put a plug in again for the kind of the uniqueness of Zededa that I'm working for now is those hosts at the edge, those embedded Linux or even those Windows, OSs running in the manufacturing and the outlying areas. The model has shifted to, we're putting on this thin Linux veneer that all it's doing is being a security model to its cloud orchestration place. And so you don't have to assume that all of these applications you're deploying are trustworthy, because you've got sort of like the whole bank has a vault door in front of it, and all the stuff inside is secured by, securing the outside at least. At least that makes sense to me, that those host OSs out in the field can have all the vulnerabilities of the host OS, and that's a weakness of trying to do application security. Instead of putting that burden on the app developer, you have a trusted host, and the applications then are securely, you're already embracing them in a locked container. So that's kind of a nice model to ease the burden on the app developers.
Was there anything in the report that anyone found surprising, or that?
I was surprised at all of the positive trends Like things absolutely trending in the right direction. I was ready to see, metrics on the downswing.
Yeah,
For me,
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was surprised at, I was looking at the incidents, right? And it seems like cloud native infrastructures had lower malware, but higher other incidents like unpatched vulnerabilities, which kind of got me thinking, right? Is this a scenario where it happened, but we didn't catch it? Or is this, somehow indicative like this? I'm kind of curious as to what explains that.
Mm.
Yeah, sort of as a humorous item as well, is like, how important is security to your cloud native strategy? Only 1% said not important. I was like, yes, we're winning.
We've won.
I also want to know who that 1%, like, where do you work? Because that would be probably a nice respite.
Yeah. Also, what I found it curious is like, okay, it's important, but what are you doing about it, right? Because I don't think that 99% that said that it's important are doing the proper steps to make it really important, right? So I think that's also important. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just pleasantly surprised, like Andrew was saying, like that number has. I remember seeing a report a couple of years ago where it was like something like 20 or 30%. We're like, nah, security, it's fine. It's trending in the right direction. There's always going to be some that are.
Yeah, especially with startups, right? When they're starting the business and everything, they want to grow their business, and sometimes they don't think about security until it may be too late. Yeah.
Like to that point, what are the main reasons for moving your apps into containers? And the fourth place position was improving security, right? It gives me a better security posture. The velocity management, reduced costs, like business drivers, like just overwhelmingly, like. Security is not necessarily primary on the reason why we're here, but while we're here, we have all this opportunity, we have all this positive trend, we have all this acknowledgement, and we have an understanding where we need to go. So I'm pleased.
Which I think is maybe a correlation with the malware statistic, right? So folks are moving into cloud native compute because they want to be more secure. The companies that are leveraging Kubernetes are automating, they're adopting security controls, which sort of is it speaks to that statistic that it's less likely that you're going to end up with malware, but when you do, it's going to be much more impactful because it has to be a much more significant type of breach, right? So of course the risk from that is going to be a lot broader, but the likelihood overall is going to be much lower. And I think the data supports that.
I was kind of surprised to see categories of big enterprise industry and smaller startups not being all that different in terms of the kinds of average responses. I expected, I don't know, maybe more variation between a small startup-y company and a big operational enterprise, but you get perhaps just the same kind of awareness of issues and things in both places.
Yeah, to that point, I think Brandon's point about audit, I know a lot of smaller players are requiring to be, thinking of SOC 2 and just to be able to deal with or to sell to or to work with larger enterprises. So I think there's that nice pull effect of raising all the boats in the tides there, because in order to interact with, you have to be doing all the right things. And I think that's a good pressure balance.
Zededa is the first company I joined where I had to go through SOC 2 stuff, and oh boy, does that make your first week busy. Whew. There's so much stuff to read, and I couldn't believe the detail in the report, and the processes and the sign-offs and the this and that. I mean, it really is extensive, and it was a bit of an eye-opener for me, the amount of effort that goes into a SOC 2 certification, which the company now has. That it really does help. It's like Andrew said, it's giving the tools. This is giving a process tools approach to help companies be more successful.
I think one of my favorite points from the report was really that correlation about deployment automation and the ability to do better security testing. Obviously. At Snyk, that's a big part of what we talk about is, all those different integration points through the software development lifecycle. But, there was clearly that deployment automation becomes an enabler for you to be able to kind of plug other things in, whether that's compliance, whether that's security testing. And then that the folks who were doing that, you know, had substantial results from it in terms of their ability to actually fix issues. You know, I mean, those numbers were just gigantic, you know, from the folks with limited automation to folks with fully automated pipelines, you know. Like I can't, it was, you know, people being able to fix vulnerabilities in less than a day or less than a week, to like people saying at the other end of the spectrum going, I don't even know how long it takes us to fix vulnerabilities, you know, which is that was it's good. And I think it lined up very closely with the stuff that was in the SIG Security white paper as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I've seen this kind of metrics on other reports as well. Once you automate the testing, the security testing on the pipeline, right? And you have your static analysis, your dynamic analysis, and your software composition analysis, and other kind of testing, all baked into the development pipeline, and everything is automated. Every commit you check for those security, you check for those dependencies, all those libraries. That increases a lot and gives the developers faster feedback. And so once they have the code, it's open on their IDE right there, and to see the issues, it's an easy fix, right? But if you only find the vulnerabilities later on, where they moved on and are working on other tickets, right? And they need to go back and check at that code. Maybe the developer is not even working at the same organization anymore. So you're gonna have more issues, and those issues are not gonna get fixed as fast as if you had the automation.
Yeah, I was going to say, adding on to that, you know, if an organization has solved the problems of fully automated deployment, they've teased out a lot of issues, and that points to their maturity. So once you have thought through the start to finish, that workflow, you've defined it, you've automated it, now you are refining continuously, and you're at the point where introducing changes or adding additional testing is already a muscle behavior, a learned behavior that everybody understands.
A virtuous cycle, doesn't it?
Exactly. That's the part that maybe an early stage startup or folks that haven't decided what to build yet, or we don't know if we're going to use this build process or this pipe, like they're probably not at that stage. So like, yes, we do CI, but we don't do CD. That's sort of pointing to, this is not we haven't paved the road yet. But if you do pave that road, the like you said, the virtual cycle can take effect and make that more streamlined. But that points to a large amount of maturity, because it means you have thought that through. You have thought about the exception handling workflow, that you've thought about how it breaks production, what risks you're willing to take there, et cetera, et cetera. Like, you've thought that through. It then gets easier to go introduce things further left.
Yeah, it's like Magno and Brad just said, right? It ends up being, I think, eventually a cost saving. So I think that is a monetary incentive to do security in this case.
We're in the final countdown here for the session. So just want to kind of make sure that we stay on task for the agenda, and maybe switch gears to anything that you're excited about from this KUBECon, looking forward to, or predictions for what we're going to see over the next day or so.
I wish I could predict what kind of swag you're going to send me.
So we still have lots of swag for folks. I've kept the links going up, and it's in the YouTube comments. But I have no idea whether it's going to be shirts or socks. The Datadog socks are highly coveted, but maybe it'll be socks.
Nice. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the security, identity, and policy tracks. I think they're starting tomorrow, if I'm not wrong, right? So we have 2 days of a lot of other great security presentations and talks there as well. Yeah, and besides that, I want to catch up on the talks that I missed from yesterday from the Cloud Native Security Day, because I almost didn't have time to catch up on that. I want to watch the presentation from Andres, Emily, and John Meadows from about
looking
supply
forward to
chain.
that one,
Supply chain white paper as well. So I think that should be really interesting. There was also a great presentation this morning from Ian Codewater and Kat Cosgrove about communication and all that stuff, how they handle that communication about changes from the projects to the end users. I think that was really cool too.
Yeah, I think there are also quite a few community track talks on security projects as well. And I think they even have one for the supply chain white paper, right? So I think there's so many things going on. I'm just excited to see what that is. There's one that kind of I think would be interesting to look at is the one on user namespaces. I know this work has been going on for a couple of years, and then this was all the way from kernel changes that were required all the way that now it's up to Kubernetes. So I'm really curious to see how that evolved.
I mean, I had a couple of kind of intro talks that sound super interesting. I know we had a question in the comments about what are the main attacks happening in containers and what strategies do you use. So I think that those sessions would be super interesting. There's the Cube Security for Beginners one that I think Tabitha from Datadog's doing with Ellen Corbez, Andrew. And then there's the Intro to Cloud Native Security, which is on Friday, I think, which is Ash Aradner and Andrej from SIG Security. So both of those will probably give you a great intro to some of the topics that we've discussed today. Kathy. And
that's what I appreciate too, is just having those introductory talks, because I don't have the decades of security experience that you guys do. And I think it is a testament to bringing security to a level that developers and people trying to get business and analysis and applications done, but they can still embrace it and at least learn the best practices, even if they're not, deep in the bowels of what makes these tools work for you.
Yeah, counter to that a little bit. I very much appreciate the 101s because I like to refresh as well. There's always new perspectives. Everything's changing. Even if you feel like you've been in this space for 2 or 3 years, do go back, because typically those talks are given by incredibly brilliant individuals who are distilling the best practices and they're squeezing it into a nice bite-sized package that may have taken a lot longer to build up if you were doing it on your own. So I always appreciate that effort, and I want to elevate that. And then when I was saying counter to that is then on that other perspective, I like the art of hiding yourself, from Lorenzo. That should be tomorrow, and uncovering sophisticated attacks in real time with eBPF. Those always tickle what's possible that we haven't thought of. So on both ends of that spectrum of let's make sure we all have a shared understanding, and then sort of what's sort of on that edge. That's always a nice balance for me. I enjoy that.
I know I'm super looking forward to a lot of the things that I think of as security UX. So when I think about that, I think about adoption curves for things in the identity policy space. Because if you think back 4 years ago, it was nobody can ever use RBAC. It breaks the entire cluster. This is going to be impossible to communicate to people. But now it's this great thing that has a high level of adoption. If you just look at the schedule, how many talks are including, good patterns for adopting RBAC, or projects like Gatekeeper and things that have made good identity and policy really, really accessible. I like to just go and see those kind of oh, we're finally there. Now we can really do least privilege IAM in the cluster, and everybody can do it.
I would also highly recommend folks hang out in the KubeCon hallway channel on the CNCF Slack, as well as there seems to be a 24-hour Zoom call going on in that channel as well. That's usually entertaining to drop in and out of. So I guess we're pretty much at time now. So I just wanted to remember to pick up your swag. And I'd just like to thank all of our guests, Magno, Brandon, Brad, and Kathy. Thank you very much for joining us, folks. And thank you to all of you for joining us.
Thank you for hosting.
It was fun.
Thank you.
This is
Cheers.
Thank
great.
you for having us. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.